Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Evolving Practice Podcast. I'm Dr. Sean Carey, and I'm with my co-host.
Dr. Bill Moss.
Yeah, and we wanted to say hi to you. It's a beautiful snowy day here. We just got about 8 inches of snow last night in Boston. Bill said he got some ice this morning.
Yeah, we're in
And
the thick of it.
yeah, we're in the thick of it. We're in the middle of winter. And with that being said, we want to talk about the concept we were talking about for today's podcast is really progression and what that means. So when we talk about spirituality, when we talk about energy, when the core mystery school concepts is progression. And what we mean by that is progression from the state that you are now to a higher state, to a more divine state. So embracing
Mm.
more and more of your own divinity. So it's a journey that never really stops, but it also applies to all aspects of life. Again, I know Dr. Bruce Lipton, he talks about how you can only be in growth or basically survival. Like there, on a
Mm.
cellular level, there's actually only two states that you can be in. And if
Mm.
we look at our life and the different aspects of our life, we want to make sure that each one is moving forward to a higher and better level.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I think this topic is we've touched upon along the way of what progression means. We're going to kind of get into the nitty-gritty awareness of the important principles of it because it's how people move forward. If when people stop moving forward with their healing, we don't really just stay there, right? We
Yeah.
don't just stay kind of at a plateau. We actually start to fall behind. So I think we're going to take a couple different angles, as chiropractors, as quote healthcare practitioners, and then also spiritual guides and healers. That the context of what we're talking about can look slightly different, but is very much as similar principles across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can look at like all the different facets of human life, and really, there is no such thing as standing still. So,
Mhm.
the Earth is moving at what, like hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. We're
Mhm.
flying around space. The whole universe is, our whole solar system is. So we can't just stay still. It just doesn't
Mm.
work that way. If you are staying still, you're not going in alignment with basically the will of nature, with the will of the universe, the will of God.
Mhm.
You're operating outside those things in a way that can be really destructive for the person. And we want to be able to look at our life and be able to look at the relationships, look at health, look at finances, look at spirituality, look at our emotional health, our soul health, and make sure that each one of these things is going towards a higher and better level. Like, and there are
Mhm.
times where it may be kind of like unbalanced in a certain direction, but we do want to make sure that like a good barometer is this moving forward.
Mm.
That's also
Yeah.
something really important with business too, right? Like looking at business, like is the business moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, these are really great principles you talked about on the level of their everything's in motion, and even on a cellular level, like if we
Yeah.
are still, there's a lot of activity and motion that's happening under the surface, and even from a physiology perspective, there's a heart beating, there's blood pumping, there's oxygen intake, there's
Mhm.
elimination, there's excretion, there's assimilation, there's all these bodily processes that are occurring in that stillness. And then even on the cellular level, there's a tone, there's a vibration, and we've talked about that. But there is this level of motion and everything within the stillness.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important that we are able to tune into that because as human
Mm.
beings, like one of the kind of core pieces is that we are created in the image of God, and as a result of that, we are here to expand.
Mm.
We
Mhm.
kind of really touched into that with our last podcast, with one of our last podcasts where we interviewed Eric Thompson, and the core nature of the human spirit, that the essence of human is expansion, and we want to see
Mm.
that the different aspects of our life are expanding because otherwise they're going
Mm.
to be something that gets left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for myself, I like to look at what are you described the aspects of progression in all different areas of our life, but the reality is there's a huge blend where when
Yeah.
you start working on the physical, it's going to influence a lot of the mental processes, a lot of emotional processes, at your energetic level. And in addition, when you work on spiritual practices or study, read, and learn, it actually helps us in many other aspects of our life. So they're not so as isolated as we sometimes put them into these boxes. Well, I'm working on this over here. Like, I love that idea. The way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Yeah.
So when influencing one aspect of your life in a very in a certain way, the way you're going about it, it tends to affect the other aspects of it, the other aspect of your progression. So, that's what I always like about the idea of when you're progressing in one area, especially, people can really relate to the physical body. And when
Yeah.
people start a physical fitness regimen, and I think this is even true when people get under chiropractic care, when they get a new routine that starts making them healthy, they start to transfer that success to other areas. And
Yeah.
that's where we see the transformation more readily, and I think that's why it's very popular to change your physical look, movement, routine. And when you get results, you're like, where else can I do it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really ties into the core of what we're talking about here, where any of these like dials, if you will, any of these different areas, if you start moving them forward, it's going to have a ripple effect everywhere. So,
Mhm,
the physical health will have a ripple into the mental and emotional health and the business and all these different things. And we want to
mhm,
continue to be looking for like where we can turn the dial that's going to have the biggest impact.
mhm,
It can be related to our physical appearance. It can be related um, to like something just like reading. If somebody
mhm,
hasn't read books in a while and you start listening to podcasts, you start listening to audiobooks, you start reading, like that can
mhm.
just set off all these different new networks and ways of thinking with your mind that will have a huge ripple effect.
That's I'm very much that type of person, and sometimes you have to like like I like to read for a not an inspiration, you could say. I like to
Yeah.
read for inspiration, not necessarily for concrete learning objectives that I'm going to implement in my life. I'm reading this book by Mike McAllowitz, and I'm referencing this because um, it just relates to what you were talking about. And I can't remember the name of it, but it's about marketing and being different, right?
Yeah.
And I almost gave up on it. I think I got to like page 50, 60, and I was like, this isn't really stimulating me. It's a little generic. I'm not feeling creative. I'm not feeling more creative by reading. And then by the time I don't know, hit page 70 or something, something magical happened to me. And I think part of
Yeah.
it is part of persistence of being like, if I wouldn't have pushed on to go, I wouldn't have started looking at things in a different way. And since I got past that point, I'm actually feeling like this incredible um, inspiration to grow things in this new, unique way. And, building the class with building wealth. And I'm like, oh, what are different ways I can reach people with this understanding? And that's like,
Yeah.
what are all my colleagues doing in the marketing world? Because, oftentimes we try to mimic and copy them. And it's like, well, that doesn't stand out anymore. So how can I be different? So it's funny
Yeah.
how like just being a little more persistent in outside of my quote comfort zone, or um, my expectations even. And now I'm like thriving with this creativity since I've been pushing through the last couple of days.
That sounds like such a good book.
It is a good book, and maybe you'll feel like me if somebody reads it. I think it's called Make It Different. I have no
Okay.
idea. It's Mike McAllowitz is a fantastic author, writer. Um, he Profit First is the book he wrote, but he's got
Yeah.
this way about keeping your attention, and also just I always find myself stimulated to be more creative. And I don't know exactly how that's relevant to progression, but I think I thrive on these creative outlets. But there are conditions that have to occur for me to almost experience that, and I never
Yeah.
experience it on demand. I think that's the point, is like a lot of our progression isn't just the superficial start and then you have it. It's like when we mine really deeper with one thing, it starts to unfold and unravel in many other ways. So I found myself like using virtues that I'm trying to work on this year
Yeah.
for just this simple book. And on the other side of that, I've experienced all these fruits that if I wasn't persistent and disciplined, I wouldn't have really come to see. Which so I've superseded my expectation with the objective way that I was going about doing it.
Yeah, that consistency and discipline is so important with that progression, because
Mhm.
it's some days like you'll have like things are it seems like everything's just going the right way and everything's flowing
Yeah.
and unfolding in this magical way. And other days it just feels like you're hitting up against a thousand different walls and blocks. So
Mhm.
we really need to have that discipline and consistency to keep moving forward, and that allows us to really align with the essence of progression. So
Mhm.
like you're reading a book, like I read the Wheel of Time series, which is this like epic fantasy series. I went through it
Mm.
last year, and it's like 15 books, and they're maybe like 800 pages each or something like that. It was like a massive undertaking. It was something I'd wanted to read for
Serious.
years. And like some of the books, like there was probably like two or three books in a row where it was like 2,500 pages, and you're like, okay, this is pretty slow here, and you're just kind of
Wow.
slogging through it, right? And but then it's like, okay, everything comes together, and
Yeah.
there are those moments where it's like, okay, sometimes you're just putting one foot in front of the other for a while, but
Mhm.
it's the
Mhm.
essence of that putting one foot in front of the other that's going to allow the breakthrough to happen.
It's funny we're comparing this to reading because I guess it's a pretty easy one to relate to for certain people.
Yeah,
But anyone who is a chiropractor, a lot of chiropractors own many green books, right? They have a beautiful
yeah,
collection on their wall of the chiropractic philosophy books and the green books. And they've only pulled out passages and read, and no one's read a cover to cover book. And I remember once I graduated chiropractic school, I started actually because you don't have time to read that kind of text in chiropractic, and
yeah,
you almost feel like you're taking away from yourself, and they're not super relaxing, I guess you could say, because they're hard to
yeah,
understand. And I remember just like committing to like I read, I think four in a row, four or five like green books in a row, and one was like the bigness of the fellow within,
yeah,
the volume 18, and these are heady, heavy, big books. Like the bigness I think is like 800 pages. And I remember after I got through a couple of them, all of a sudden I could actually read those green books. Like I could actually finally get
yeah,
into one right from the start and actually make sense of what the hell was going on. And I don't think most people get that much from those philosophy books, and they hate them because the fact that like unless persistent with them, you really
yeah,
don't get a thorough understanding of the chiropractic philosophy and the depth and breadth and the mind of BJ Palmer, until you
yeah.
do something like that, you know?
Yeah, there is that core element of the discipline and consistency, and I
Mhm.
think one of the things I admire about you, Bill, is this that like in regards to business, it's just part of you in regards to spiritual progression. But I
Mm.
think your training as a marathon runner like has really just like helped you, because you have this
Yeah.
like built into your core of like, okay, I'm going to go to the distance on this thing.
Yeah.
And we've applied that approach with the podcast. I think this is episode number 34 for us, but we both
Yeah.
committed right from the very beginning to do at least 100 episodes. And
Yeah.
when I work with clients, that's one of the things that is really important as far as a person's result. Like, can they stick to this for a certain period
Mm.
of time? Because the healing just takes time. Like, we can open up
Yeah.
the neurological channels and stimulate the nervous system in the right way with chiropractic care, to put the body on in this phase of healing or the state of
Mhm.
healing. But that
Mhm.
needs to be sustained over a period of time.
Yeah.
And the spiritual
Y
progression is it's the same thing with people, like the being able to approach it, be like, okay, this is something that uh, I'll keep getting rewards from, but it
Mhm.
is it is something to treat almost like a marathon. Like our
Mm.
eternal spiritual journey is very much a marathon in a certain way. And
Yeah.
if you can approach it with like, oh, okay, like this isn't going to be all, like maybe all my wishes and dreams aren't going to come through in the first 6 months,
Mm.
but like I'm going to commit because I know that each step that I go, every step I go towards my higher self, there's going to be better and better results from it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and the longer the journey goes, the more you need these reference points, right? So
Yeah,
it's like, well, let's use the podcast for instance. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about we're almost at a year when we really started to kind of dig in, work, and even record.
yeah,
And we're very far from shore, if you will, on this journey. We're far from the beginning, and I can remember pieces of getting started. But now we're out here. you kind of lose track of like, it's nice that you said, oh, we committed to 100 episodes, and I believe we'll actually go beyond that. We're not there yet,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that was a good thing to sow into the practice early on. But there's so much that's been stimulated by doing this along the way. We've gotten better at interviewing. We've met a lot of new individuals and people that we also knew and got to go deeper and have better relationships and connections with. I definitely know my communication skills as a chiropractor and guide have evolved and grown. I've learned new ways
Uh,
to talk about things, and I'm coming up with new ideas as far as like live events and ways to bring community together because of this. So it is fascinating, but if you don't kind of have new reference along the way, it's very easy to get kind of you know, caught up in like, why am I doing this? What's the
yeah.
point? Oh, we're not viral, or we didn't make tons of money off of it, and whatever the point is, going to lose track unless you have a new reference point. And I think that's a really important part of establishing along the way. I think that's why chiropractors lay out a plan is very effective, because an appropriate
Yeah.
plan is going to have an end and a beginning and some reference point along the way to check in. And that just makes sense. That's a way to actually objectively measure progress. And, on a spiritual path, people aren't actually used to that very often. Like, then you're
Yeah.
just comparing yourself to your feelings and your emotions in the moment. You're like, well, I like today. No, I don't like today. It's working today. It's not working tomorrow. But if you
Yeah.
don't have like these new points to kind of look at how far you've come, you lose the picture. And I think that's probably like what you were describing with the marathon is marathon does have a clear ending. It's very
Yeah.
clear, but there's these other phases that if you don't have a coach or a plan or others that have done it before you aren't aware of a lot. You're missing a ton on that journey. You're really missing a ton.
Something that I think is interesting with this concept too is that like there's a lot of different business books and things that will talk about do something for 30 days so it becomes a habit.
Mhm.
Drink water with lemon for 30 days, or
Yeah.
do whatever the thing is, do the push-ups for 30 days. And there's certainly value in that to ingrain the habit. But what if we had the approach of I'm going to do this for 10,000 days? Yeah, yeah, it's like because like we just don't. I don't know, like our current culture, the way we are as humans, we're just so all over the place. We're so distracted with everything all the time. We don't
Yep.
have that essence of deeper commitment in a lot of ways. And then
Hmm.
we get false expectations maybe.
Hmm.
And then people kind of quit just as soon as they hit that first hurdle. And
Yeah.
with it, like when you have, for example, one thing to relate this to spiritual progression. One of the things that we work on in the mystery school is training people's spiritual senses. So that
Mm.
includes like spiritual sight,
Yep.
spiritual hearing, these different senses. Some people start at different levels. Some people might sense very a lot at the beginning. Some people don't. And at the beginning, sometimes people are like, "Oh, I want to do this one class and just have everything totally open," and it
Yeah.
just, or they might be comparing themselves to somebody else. I said, no, just keep doing the things, and those keep working with these muscles, and they'll get stronger and stronger over time. The more
Hmm.
you work with them, the stronger they're going to get, the more open they're going to
Yeah.
get.
Hmm.
So then you can get the fruits of it. But otherwise, what's going to end up happening is you're going to label yourself as like, oh, I'm not somebody who has that gift. I'm just not
Hmm.
that way, and you end up really robbing yourself of something that can be very helpful.
Yeah. The training of the nervous system requires it requires consistency, commitment, and repetitive nature. You know what I mean? To create a new pattern. I remember in chiropractic school, this is very basic and simple, but it's one of the easiest ones to understand. Is I remember somebody suggesting because we use our non-dominant hand a lot in chiropractic, right? When
Yeah,
we're adjusting from different sides, and when you're new, everything is going to be on your strong side, right? You're like
yeah,
finding
yeah,
everything with the use. But I remember the instructors inspiring us to like start doing some activities with our non-dominant hand. And I remember starting to brush my teeth with my non-dominant hand. And I remember the first day was like a nightmare. I was like, my teeth are gonna rot because this is so hard. And then and then after a couple of days, you were like, oh, I kind of have this. And then after a couple of weeks, it was like surprising to me. I remember being like, this is something I can actually do now
Yeah.
and use. But most people would pick it up, feel so wobbly that first day, and just totally kind of shut it down and go back to where you were comfortable. And there's things take time, but to be like adept, if you will, at
Yeah.
something, it doesn't take as long as you actually think it will,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but
What
it
a great
does take.
example. Yeah, what an amazing example, and it's like that. It's something that we don't think about, but
Mhm,
neurologically, it's huge as far as the input to the brain that happens when you do something like that, and then
mhm,
how it's setting off all these different reactions, and driving the brain a different way. It's and
mm,
very much progressing something that's just this is how it is. I brush my teeth this way, and to completely change it that way. Uh,
mm.
it's just so big for the nervous system, for our brain, but then also to show us that we can experience the world a different way. I think.
Yeah, we seem to be talking about books a lot. I remember there's in popular, I don't know if you want to call it pop culture, but popular in the world of mastery, that the concept of like 10,000 hours was really popular
Yeah.
years ago, right? Where it was, I
Yeah.
think it was one of the Malcolm Gladwell books, and it was, I think it was
Yeah.
Outliers. To become a master, you need 10,000 hours in a subject. But a couple of years after that, or I remember reading a book called The First 24 Hours. And basically what it's saying is, yes, it might take you 10,000 hours to be a master adjuster in chiropractic, and some people will get there and some people won't. But the the first 24 hours of anything are like really really important, because within that time frame you can become very good at something. So like if you wanted to learn how to do social media Facebook ads, let's say, and I don't
Yeah.
have this skill, but if I really wanted to learn it, it's the biggest impact is going to be the first 24 hours. I can become quite capable of knowing enough to do it with competence, right? So it's like many tasks that we want to learn actually, will be jump started within a shorter period of time where we can actually become quite competent at it. Um, and then there's a little more joy, right? Because
Yeah.
is this like we have fun doing the things that challenge us too.
Yeah.
And I think that's always, it's not just like learning to suffer. We're
Right.
not
Right.
just
Right.
learning to suffer with progression. There should be this level of joy. But when we become more capable and adapt to do things, there is more joy. And knowing it can come actually quicker than you think it can is very helpful.
I love that. Yeah. I'm just reflecting on my own progression in life. And there
Mm,
are the different times where like with business, there like business and spirituality are the big ones that
mhm.
come to mind. I remember when I took over my practice and I just kind of made this commitment of like, okay, I'm going to do everything. And there was so
Wow.
much growth that happened in such a short
Mm,
period of time, because all of a sudden there was like 10 major new things that I had to be responsible for. I had to be
mm,
responsible for bookkeeping in a different way, and I had to be responsible for HR and all the legal aspects of the business, and the client care, but as the head doctor, because I was an associate before that, and for
mm.
the patient care, all those different things. But it was putting myself in that situation that just led to like massive growth. And I think you probably had that same experience too, getting started in practice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of that, launching away from the shore again. It's like you learn to
Yeah.
swim by kind of being out in the water. And I definitely experienced that. And sometimes, and I think we this is most relevant now. You've kind of made some switches with your practice, and I use an associate, and I think some of those, like, there's these opportunities along the way in business where you have more help and then maybe you have less. And I always find those times when I have less help after I had more help to be like a recentering. So I
Yeah.
can get a new grasp around what another person was doing, how that was helpful and how it wasn't helpful. Because the
Yeah.
reality is, in business as an owner, no one's going to care quite the same way as you, but you can definitely find people that care a lot about certain aspects of what you do.
Yeah.
And um, I'm finding, I'm sure you found this in the transition you're making, is it's nice to have those opportunities to kind of look at the whole picture so you can fine tune things. It's like slowing down to speed up, right? It's like you hit
Yeah.
this new plateau and change the direction and you fine tune some of the dials before you do things. And I feel like I'm hitting that again because I think I'm growing out of the new program in my practice. I'm starting
Yeah.
to build some, international kind of classes and I'm changing a little bit of the model of trying to build a few bigger classes for myself. So it's requiring some new things and I like to have it happen now, right?
Yeah.
But it's teaching me to do things better um, now. So in the long run, they're going to be more sustainable and the foundation's a lot stronger. And that happens oftentimes. We're at new
Yeah.
plateaus along the path of progression.
It's funny how this is all happening for you while you're getting ready for another baby, because talking about progression.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. There's nothing. Oh man, Lauren and I talk about this a lot because we found out back in November, and it was very, it was like it was a
Unplanned,
surprise,
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And we weren't even sure, where are we? But right away, it's like we both would say if you had to interview us both at early November, we would have been like, we're finally hitting stride with this new
Yeah.
way of doing things with one child and her career and my career and the things that we're involved in, and it all felt really stable. And then we're like, oh man, it's gonna change again. What are we gonna do? Um, Based on our past experiences, we're like, it's going to be wonderful. There's going to be some
Yeah.
new sacrifices we have to make. There's also going to be some new things we overcome. It's going to be awesome, like in a new way, because we're growing here. So where else are we going to grow along the way? Right.
I love it. And it just the energy of it, right? That energy of like forward motion and growth. It just feels like there's this huge ripple that's happening for you as a result of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I'm kind of riding that wave because
Yeah.
having a child, nothing, it does clean up like the nonsense
Yeah.
in relationships, in the self. Just hopefully, I'm sure it doesn't always, but I found with Lauren and I, it makes us prioritize quickly, and we're pretty good now. We actually got to go on a date on Friday, and we had the conversation about like, oh my gosh, do you remember when like this was it? We could go
Yeah.
out wherever we wanted and go to dinner, and um, like we got to talk like adults. And sometimes you don't, and if you don't have these stops along the way, you don't realize what you're missing. And we're working on having a nanny part time for this transition, and so we have some moments that are um, to just even check in on adult life because that gets really hard with
Yeah.
kids. So yeah, it's definitely, kids are a great way to help you understand your progression in this world, and hopefully you're overcoming things so your children can see that you're overcoming, because that's a big thing. It makes you reflect on like, what do I want to model for this younger being that I'm responsible for, because they're taking in more of what they see than
Yeah.
what you say or what you tell them.
Yeah.
They're watching carefully.
With my progression, I also think back to the mystery school, and when I did that first empower thyself initiation, where like one of the things we tell people is that it's going to expand the amount of light that you can hold. It's going to realign you with the will of God, so you start flowing with the will of God. It's going to expand your capacity to hold spiritual light by 10 times, and you're going to learn how to work with angels and do these ancient rituals that King Solomon did. And to me, it sounded like kind of abstract and fantastical when I heard that. But then I went through this process and started doing it, and just having that approach of, this is something that I'm going to do long term, because it was very clearly working for me. But
Mm.
what I didn't expect was how much it was going to have this ripple into all these different aspects of my life. Because with what you're going through with like having a new baby, it's kind of like an initiation, right? It's like a
Yeah.
massive life change. And when we talk about spiritual initiation, it is also that way. It's a massive change in your spiritual foundation and fabric to live a life where it's in alignment with the divine, and that becomes a very core part of your being in your life.
Mhm.
And for me, it
Mhm.
was just things started taking off that had been stuck in so many different areas of my life, and it started really quickly. And it was kind of like where you are right now, just this explosion of all these different things happening at once that were really good and
Mm.
exciting. They're like
Mhm. Mhm.
the birth of the new, if you will. And initiation
Yes.
is very much like a birth type energy because it is something new.
Mm.
There's something new coming in. It's a new level of yourself that you connect to, where it's
Mhm.
like you're rising up to this. You're taking a ladder up to a new height, but on that new height is you, and you're meeting you, and then
Mm.
you are you. But you're going to be
Mm.
that higher version going forward. So it's the birth of the new you.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it does feel very, very similar, and it's hard to really describe to people until it happens. It really is. It's kind of like parenting. I mean, it is really hard to describe.
Yeah.
Tried to just tell me how my life was going to change and this and that, and it's funny. A lot of times people share the things like, "Oh, you're not gonna sleep anymore, and you're not," and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of, like, physical
Mm.
things that actually happen when you have a
Yeah.
child, like, you don't get as much sleep, and you have to perform under different conditions, and,
Yeah.
your own life becomes less, not less important, that's not a good term, but some of your priorities become less important, so you put
Yeah.
more of your priorities over here, and people dramatize all of those things, but at the end of the day, you have this, like, joy and fulfillment and, experience of love in a new way that grew, that you couldn't totally fully understand until it happened.
Yeah.
You don't care about other aspects, right? The same thing's
Yeah.
very much true with initiation. It's like you can tell people you're going to be more like your true self. You're going to come more to this knowingness of who you are. And people are like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I always say, like, I can share what that means, how I experience that. But the reality is, it's like you're going to experience it for yourself, and if you're
Yes.
keen to it, if you look more deeply and slow down, it and get curious about what you're noticing, I think you'll see some great changes and great shifts. And doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's like parenting; it's not going to be easy, but that's where you learn what you're made of in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the growth with it too, it's like if people can have that commitment of like if they can have that a bit more trust with the process, I think it really
Hmm.
helps them where they can be like, okay, this is something I'm committing to for
Hmm.
at least a year or something like that
Hmm.
to embody these because normally we recommend 30 days for people. But like
Yeah.
really, if you do it for a year, the differences you're going to make are going to be massive. You're going to really understand at that point. And I imagine that with like, uh, go ahead, please.
Before you move on, I feel like that's a theme that's like coming up, is like, I think we should talk more about long-term healing
Yeah.
and long-term progression, where we've almost accommodated to people's short-term comforts, as opposed to being like, you know, when you make a dietary change, like, you're going to notice things that keep you inspired for a month, but the real magic is when you make it a lifestyle for
Yeah.
years, right? That's where
Yeah.
you won't go back. It's like, the reality is, if you experience spiritual initiation, use your tools and really work it for an entire year, regardless of how
Yeah.
you feel and what your ego tells you, then look back and be like, okay, now I'll really give an honest report. It's like
Yeah.
anything worth doing, and like, oh, parenting was tough. I quit doing that today. I didn't give it
Yeah.
my all, because it required work, and all
Yeah.
this stuff came up, and I really wasn't sleeping well and stuff. But I was like, I don't really need to take care of the things I need to care. The reality is, it's like in chiropractic, people get mad because we're like putting them on. This doesn't happen all the time, but or very often, but we put people on plans to really help them get well, to
Yeah.
establish a new set point. And sometimes people get mad about that, but it's like, that's where you actually find out how this worked. When you
Yeah.
look back and you're like, wow, I was experiencing X, Y, and Z very often. And now,
Yeah.
even if I have an issue, I rely on myself to get through that, not the chiropractor. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
that was the point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely love what you said about this is we've been accommodating people's short-term thinking and really the culture. It's like
Yeah.
we're a fast food, like instant result, Amazon delivers the next day. We have access to Netflix and Prime Video, and you can access thousands of videos and all that stuff.
Hmm.
So it's like we're very wired for short term. But I imagine like one of the gifts that comes from parenting is like you can't return your kid the moment things get hard, right? Like there's like
Yeah.
you're in that commitment. And if
Hmm.
people approach things that way, like the benefit of having that year-long approach for something, because we know doing this with many people that they're all the spiritual light is going to come in if we do initiation, and then they're going to go and they're going to have all sorts of breakthroughs, and then they're going to hit some type of wall. There's going to be that big core thing that's been getting in their way, that's been behind the surface.
Hmm.
And if people have that like year-long approach, they actually have that commitment and discipline to break through that thing. So then not
Mm.
only do they have that initial burst of like that 24-hour success and breakthroughs, they're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm starting to get that experience of what it's like to, yeah, get that boost initially. But then there was this big piece that I was stuck against that I broke through. And
Mm.
then there was two others after that within the next, 9 months. So
Mm.
it just really changes the perspective that people have, I think. And then they get to
Mm.
look back and see the fruits of how much they've grown. And a lot of it was the overcoming the blocks, where if you didn't
Mhm.
have that commitment and discipline, that they end up, they'd never get joy or strength from overcoming that big thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a virtue-driven life, right? Like, kind of what you're describing is like we're leveraging these virtues that make a successful life regardless of what's in front of us, the task at hand. And over
Yeah.
time, because you're exercising, from that more divine state, right? Those are more divine principles. You
Yeah.
really do get to have this level of accomplishment that's not based on others' expectations of the
Yeah.
self, which is, I think, why we kind of slow down or we get thrown off is because we don't recognize necessarily those individual aspects of the way we like to do things truly and what we want to be doing. It's um one thing this podcast, we've been using this podcast for it's inspired me lately to write more. I'm really enjoying writing. We're talking more, and say if you can talk, you can write. And I'm starting to
Yeah.
enjoy writing more along the way as well. So it's starting to come out, and that's something I've always been into. And regardless of if it's marketing purposes or has a specific purpose to make money or whatnot, it's just
Yeah.
something I kind of like to do. And I think sometimes we always sacrifice the things that are going to help us in other areas of our life for the expectation of they should be quote doing something for us, for our career or for money. Like we just
Yeah.
can't do it for the sake of like joy and reflection, right? It's got to be for
Yeah.
accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very much like the artist way too, is like wanting to
Yeah,
create for the sake of creating.
yeah. Kids do that for you too. They'll have you coloring and drawing and crafting. And I stenciled today, and I was like, I don't want to
Oh,
stencil. She's like, Daddy, come stencil with me. And I was like, it's just. And then all of a sudden, I made this whole
yeah.
picture of stencils, and I'm like, this is awesome.
We got a bunch of snow here, and like right across from me, I'm in the house that I bought, the house I grew up in from my parents. Right across from me, there's this house, and they have little kids, and all the
Mm,
kids are like snow. They're not snow. They have snow tubes, so they're going down this hill in their yard, and I've been like watching them today because they're just like having so much joy in the snow.
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, and it's those simple things, those simple joys of just doing it for the sake of doing it.
I love it. I love it. I mean, and that's probably one of the biggest parts of progression is like it's not an endless suffering. You should find
Yeah,
joy in the way that you're going over time. It doesn't mean the way is always joyful or it is always feels good. That's probably the same, but it's in that accomplishment that it becomes really amazing. People don't train for a marathon and love every minute. That's like a
Yeah.
crazy. And people think like people who run a lot, like they're always going fast and always love it. Like that's not how training is. There's days you could talk to somebody the whole time. There's days that you're sucking air. There's days that you're really performing well, and there's days that you're not. And then they're all
Yeah.
built towards, kind of learning what you can do, what you're capable of. That's at the end of the day is like the marathon becomes the test of what you're capable of. In that block of training and also in that day that you committed to. So there's a lot of learning in there. And I look back on that and totally like I walked away from running with like no regrets. And sometimes I was like, why did I do all that? Right. But now it's so easy to use that as a metaphor to so
Yeah.
many activities that I do. And it's funny that we're talking about that because just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've gotten all these runners in my practice. All of
I
them.
love it.
And I had another guy, I haven't seen him for 6 months and he's a runner and he came back and I'm like, maybe I want to do it a little bit. Maybe there's more lessons for me to
Yeah.
like weave in this new decade of life. So who the heck knows? We'll see.
It's so exciting. And
Yeah.
something that a good resource, we talked a lot about reading, but a great book that relates to a lot of what we've talked about today. There's a book by Dave Lanyon called
Mm.
Essential Training for the Spiritual Warrior. Do you have it
Just
there? I
look
have
for
it in my
myself. I,
office.
I think it's in my other room. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the title is Essential Training for the Spiritual Warrior or Warrior of Light by Dave
Yeah.
Lanyon. And that's a really great book that goes into these different concepts. And he just has such a brilliant way of teaching and sharing that you'd love the book. There's some really good exercises there too.
We should do an episode on books to like our top something book to
I
read
think yeah.
that are relevant. Like because we both are definitely big readers and we've mentioned like 4 or 5 titles in this one. So maybe we'll do that in the upcoming because there's so many good books in spirituality, business development, and many that people don't know about. Maybe we'll do the obscure ones, right? We'll just like pick
Yeah.
the ones you think no one's heard about that have impacted you, and we'll talk about them. I like
Yeah.
that.
I think that's a great idea too.
Cool. Because they can
Excellent.
also help assist in progression. They've definitely helped us along the way. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, this is a great topic. I mean, because it's something that's going to be relevant pretty much all the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Excellent.
All the time. Yeah, so
Well, thank you.
we'd be curious where you guys struggle with as far as progression. Where are you working and where are successes? So, we ask you to share this podcast, share this out. If you've made it this far, share it with somebody either the YouTube channel, the Spotify or Apple iTunes link. We are doing. Sean and I are both going to be at the Building Wealth seminar or event, I guess you call it, in Reading, Pennsylvania on March 29th, 10 to 6 p.m. We'll have a couple other things going on that weekend, but we'll start including the link and some of the things we do, but it's open to the public. Anyone can join us. And it's about abundance. It's about expanding your container so you can have progression in aspects of your life, not just finances. So we're excited to have Eric. If you haven't listened to that podcast yet, but we'd love to have you join us with that live event because it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be a really incredible event, and it brings us a lot of joy when people tell us, that they've listened to the episode and what they've gotten out of the different episodes. So it's really fun to connect with people in person.
So thanks again. We look forward to bringing you more content and growing throughout 2025.
Thanks so much.